All right, so now we're going to go into photosynthesis. So we need to go through the stages and make sure we understand what's going on in the whole process. All right, so for photosynthesis, first thing that we need to do is figure out the formula. Right. So what's the formula for photosynthesis? What goes in, Morg? So 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O. I'm balancing it, and you're reading they didn't balance it. But I balance it because the law of conservation of matter, first law of thermodynamics, energy and matter has to be conserved, means that whatever comes out has to go in, and vice versa, right? So I always put the light over the bar, over the line, the equation, mostly because light is not matter, so it's not part of the reactants of the products. It's the energy source, right? And what does it give you if I mix up CO2 and water? Morg? So glucose plus oxygen. Good. All right. So what type of a metabolic reaction is this? It's anabolic because for two reasons. We're building something and energy in. Right? So photosynthesis is metabolic. We're going to build a glucose, a more complex thing, and therefore we have to put energy into it, and that's light energy. All right? So what's the first step here? First step in photosynthesis, the light reaction. Now, what's the first thing that happens in the light reactions? First thing that we need to do, what do we have to do to the water? All right, good. Split it. What do we split it into? So we split it into oxygen, hydrogen, and electrons. What happens to the oxygen? Byproduct. All right, so it's released. Oxygen's a byproduct. What happens to the hydrogens? What's the point of them? What's that? To make a gradient. Good. So the hydrogens make a gradient. Photons, electron transport chain, and that pumps hydrogen into what? Where does the hydrogen go in photosynthesis? Pumps it into the thylakoid. All right. Actually, tell you what, that's the gradient that the hydrogen, right? But technically, that whole thing is showing what happens with the electrons, okay? Because the electrons, the photons pump the electrons through the ETC, and that's what creates the gradient. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. That's the electrons flowing. It's the light that powers it. The gradient allows for what to happen? So ATP synthesis, yeah. What's it called though? What's the general term for how the hydrogen can make ATP? It's chemiosmosis, right? Because we have a gradient, we can do chemiosmosis, right? What's the protons or the hydrogens moving? What's that called? Proton motive force through the ATP synthase. And then what do we call adding a phosphate to an ADP? We make ATP, but what's that process called? Good. That gives us ATP. Right. Now, those hydrogens and electrons get added to what at the very end? NADP plus, which comes out as hydrogens and electrons get added to the bus, and they come out as NADPH. Right? So that's the light reaction. We have chemiosmosis, we have the gradient, causes chemiosmosis. The electrons moving due to the light are what creates the gradient. So we've transferred that energy into ATP. Now both of these guys are going to move into step 2, which is what? Step 1 is the light reaction. Step 2 is the Calvin cycle. Right? So in the Calvin cycle, we start with a 5-carbon molecule. What's that 5-carbon molecule called? Oops. Right. That 5-carbon molecule is called RUBP. What has to come in? David? Carbon. So it's carbon dioxide comes in. And when the carbon dioxide comes in, you immediately make what? A 6-carbon molecule, which gets split into a molecule called PGA. PGA is missing one important ingredient before it can be a sugar. What do I need to add to the PGA to make it a sugar? Got to drop off some hydrogens. I'm going to use some energy. This is what we call the reduction phase. Because when you add electrons to anything, you reduce it. Okay. What's it called when we add carbon, a gas to a solid? Fixation. Good. So that's the fixation phase. And we end up, after reduction, with G3P. That leaves the chloroplast, and 2 times G3P can make what? Glucose. Good. But the problem is, then I'm left with G3P. But to start the cycle, I need what? RUBP. So we use some more ATP for regeneration. All right, so we have fixation, reduction by adding the hydrogens. That gives us a G3P, and then we have regeneration. All right, and then outside the chloroplasts, we have glucose being formed. Remember, this happens in the stroma, which is liquid, and over here, this happens in the thylakoid, which is the membrane. All right. Now, for those of you that are curious about how the math is working out, it's technically 3 RUBPs plus 3 carbon dioxides makes 3 of these, which then splits into 6 PGA, which makes 6 G3P minus 1 G3P, gives you 5, which can then be rearranged back into 3 5s. So it gives you 5 3s, which rearrange or regenerate back into 3 5s. So that's how it actually works. 3 carbon dioxides give you 1 G3P. 2 times that gives you 1 sugar.